If you watched our video about Montano, the African warrior who became one of the most powerful vampires in medieval Europe, you may be wondering, how did a tribe lost in the mountains of East Africa manage to produce such an exceptional warrior that even a millennial vampire chose him as heir? The answer is on the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro. There, more than 1,000 years ago, the Maasai Falcon tribe developed a warrior training system so brutal, so effective, that it turned children into war machines even before they turned 10 years old. But this is not just a video about ancient military techniques. It's about how people managed to resist empires, vampires, and even the passage of time. It's about how the young Ontai, whom you know as Montano, was forged in this cauldron of extreme discipline and ritualized violence. Today, we will dive deep into the world of the Maasai warriors of the 11th century. Let's explore every aspect of the training that Montano created. Let's understand why Mount Kilimanjaro was not just a mountain, but the war university where only the strongest survive. And in the end, you will understand why an ancient vampire who had created and destroyed hundreds of heirs over millennia found in a Maasai boy something he had never seen before: absolute honor forged in absolute suffering. Get ready. This journey will completely change your vision of what it means to be a warrior. To understand the Falcon tribe and the birth of Ontai, we need to go back to the 11th century in East Africa. This was a time of massive transformations throughout the African continent. Mount Kilimanjaro, with its 5,895 meters high, dominated the landscape between what is now Tanzania and Kenya. But for the Maasai peoples who inhabited its slopes, Kilimanjaro was much more than a mountain. It was Ingegai, the house of God. It was the place where heaven and earth met. The Maasai were not a single people, but a confederation of related tribes that shared language, customs, and an extremely sophisticated warrior culture. They had migrated from the Nile Valley centuries before, bringing with them cattle breeding and combat techniques that made them dominant in the region. The Falcon tribe was one of the oldest Maasai lineages. Their name came from the hawk that they considered their totemic animal, symbol of sharp vision and deadly attack. They inhabited the southern slopes of Kilimanjaro, a region of rich savannas where they could raise cattle and train warriors away from the eyes of rival tribes. In the 11th century, East Africa was a melting pot of conflicts. To the north, the Aksumite Empire was in decline, leaving a power vacuum. To the east, Arab and Persian merchants established city-states along the coast of the Indian Ocean, bringing about Islam and creating Swahili culture. To the south and west, the Bantu kingdoms expanded their territory. The Maasai, including the Falcon tribe, were constantly under pressure. They needed to defend their cattle herds against rival tribes. They needed to resist attempts at enslavement by Arab merchants who came from the coast. They needed to protect their sacred lands against invaders who did not respect Ingegai. This constant pressure forged a culture of total war among the Maasai of the time. Every man was a warrior. There was no class of merchants. There was no class of specialized artisans. You raised cattle. You fought, or you didn't survive. But the Falcon tribe took this warrior culture to an extreme that shocked even other Maasai. They developed what they called Olmakau, the path of blood. It was a military training system that literally began at birth and only ended with death. When Ontai was born, during that violent storm in Kilimanjaro, he was born in a society that considered war not as a political tool, but as a state of permanent existence. A society where the ability to kill was not a matter of talent, but of survival. His mother's death in childbirth was interpreted by the shaman as a powerful omen. In many cultures, a child whose mother dies in childbirth would be considered cursed. Among the Falcon tribe, it meant that the child had stolen the mother's life force for herself. It meant that the child was a born warrior who had already won his first victory before he even opened his eyes. The shaman called the child Ontai, which means the one who remains or the one who resists. It wasn't just a name, it was a prophecy. It was a weight that the child would carry throughout his mortal and immortal life. This is the foundation on which the entire history of Montano was built. A boy born in a storm, marked by death, raised by a people who turned war into religion. Olmakau. The blood path that shaped Ontai was not simply a military training program. It was a complete system of human transformation that covered every aspect of the life of a Maasai warrior. The first phase of Olmakau began in the first days after birth. While most cultures obsessively protect their newborns, the Falcon tribe deliberately exposed them to stress. Babies were left outdoors for controlled periods, exposed to the cold of mountain nights. They were fed at irregular intervals to teach their bodies to function, even with hunger. This was not gratuitous cruelty. The Maasai had observed 4 generations that children exposed to controlled stress in the first months developed stronger immune systems. They cried less. They adapted better to deprivations. This empirical observation was centuries ahead of Western science. Between 1 and 3 years of age, the second phase began pain training. Children were deliberately exposed to small physical pain in a controlled environment. Small superficial cuts, non-poisonous insect bites, light burns from embers. The goal was not to torture, but to teach 2 crucial lessons. First lesson: pain is information, not an emergency. A warrior who screams when he is injured reveals his position to the enemy. A warrior who panics with minor injuries cannot continue fighting when seriously injured. From an early age, Maasai boys learned to process pain differently from other children. Second lesson: you can function through pain. Children who learn early that they can complete tasks, even with physical discomfort, develop extraordinary psychological resilience. They are not limited by their own fear of pain. Ante was exceptional, even at this early stage. The shaman who raised him observed that the boy never cried, not even when he was bitten by scorpions during a resistance exercise at the age of 5. It wasn't that Ontai didn't feel pain. It was that he had learned to process pain as data, not as trauma. At the age of 6, the third phase began, training with real weapons. Note that I said real weapons, not training weapons. 6-year-old boys in the Falcon tribe carried spears with sharp tips, not safe versions. They carried knives that could kill, not toy tools. This seems insane by modern standards, but it had a brutal logic. A warrior needs to have visceral respect for his weapon. A child who trains with fake weapons learns careless habits. A child who knows that any mistake with his spear can result in serious injury learns care, precision, and responsibility. Accidents happened, of course. Approximately 1 in 10 boys suffered serious injuries during this phase of training. The tribe accepted this as the necessary price to create truly effective warriors. Boys who were seriously injured by carelessness were considered inadequate for the warrior's path and were redirected to take care of the cattle. Ontai stood out again. At the age of 7, he was already handling an adult-sized combat spear with deadly precision. The shaman tested him by making him throw the spear at the target while running at full speed. Ontai hit the center of the target 5 times in a row. The fourth phase began at the age of 8. Real combat against dangerous animals. This was not metaphorical. 8-year-old boys in the Falcon tribe were sent in small groups to hunt animals that could kill them. Wild boars, hyenas, even young leopards. The goal was not only to teach hunting skills, it was to teach what it really means to fight for your life. A boy who has never faced real death in combat is just a boy with a spear. A boy who survived a leopard trying to tear his throat as a warrior. The statistics were dark. Approximately 1 in 5 boys died during the animal combat phase. Even more, they were permanently injured. But those who survived developed something that cannot be taught in any military academy. They lost the paralyzing fear of death. Ontai killed his first hyena at the age of 8.5. At 9, he faced alone a young leopard that had attacked the tribe's cattle. He carries the scars of that combat to this day, even in his vampiric body. But he killed the leopard with his own spear, without help. And then came the 5th phase, the most brutal of all, combat against other humans. At the age of 9, boys from the Falcon tribe began to participate in real raids against enemy tribes. The Olmakau System culminated in what the Maasai called the Manyata, the war raids that transformed tested boys into complete warriors. For Ontai, this phase began brutally early. At the age of 9, during a series of attacks against a rival tribe that had stolen cattle from the Falcon tribe. Let me be absolutely clear about what a Maasai raid meant at this time. They were not symbolic skirmishes or ritualized demonstrations of courage. They were military operations planned to kill adult men, capture cattle and women, and terrorize enemies to the point of not attacking again. Children like Ontai were not observers in these raids. They were active fighters, expected to kill and be killed like any adult warrior. The logic was simple and brutal. If you can't kill an enemy who is trying to kill you, you don't deserve to survive. Ontai's first raid was against the camp of a rival tribe, 3 days away from Kilimanjaro. The attack was planned to coincide with the new moon, when the darkness was almost total. 60 Maasai warriors, including 12 boys between 9 and 12 years old, approached the enemy camp in complete silence. The Maasai tactical doctrine was sophisticated. They did not attack inline formation as European armies would do. They used what today we would call small unit tactics. Groups of 5 to 8 warriors operating semi-independently, coordinated by silent signals. Ontai was placed in a group led by a 30-year-old veteran warrior. His specific task was simple. When the attack began, he had to kill any enemy child of his age or older who tried to take up weapons. When the attack started, it was chaotic and violent. Maasai warriors entered the camp screaming, spears shining under the light of bonfires. Enemy men took their weapons. Women screamed, children ran, and Ontai, a 9-year-old boy, killed another approximately 12-year-old boy who had picked up a spear and was trying to defend his mother. Ontai hit him in the chest with his own spear, crossing the heart. The boy died instantly. This was the reality of Maasai training. It wasn't abstract. It wasn't theoretical. At the age of 9, Ontai had real human blood on his hands. Blood of a child who was probably not very different from him. The raid was a complete success from a military point of view. The Falcon tribe captured 120 heads of cattle, killed 19 enemy warriors, and lost only 3 of their own. Of the 12 boys who participated, 2 died in combat and 1 was permanently killed. But the psychological impact on these boys was deep and permanent. They had crossed the line that most humans never cross. They had taken human lives. Some boys collapsed after the first raid, unable to process what they had done. These were kindly redirected to other roles in the tribe. Ontai didn't collapse. In fact, according to the oral records preserved by the descendants of the Falcon tribe, he didn't even talk about that first murder. When the shaman asked how he felt, Ontai simply replied, "I did what was necessary." This answer reveals something fundamental about Ontai's character that would explain his subsequent actions as he was not a sociopath without empathy. He had simply developed the ability to separate need from emotion. He could do terrible things without hesitation if they were necessary to protect his tribe. In the following 5 years, between 9 and 14 years, Ontai participated in approximately 20 raids against enemy tribes. He killed at least 30 men in direct combat, an extraordinary number even by Maasai standards. He developed a reputation as an exceptional warrior, calm under pressure, brutal when necessary, but never cruel without purpose. A specific incident illustrates its character. During a raid when he was 11 years old, he captured an enemy boy of approximately 8 years old. The standard doctrine was to kill enemy male children to prevent future revenge. But Ontai realized that this specific boy had tried to protect younger children instead of taking a gun. Ontai took the boy to the raid leader and argued that a child who chose to protect the weak instead of fighting had the heart of a shepherd, not a warrior. The leader accepted the argument. The boy was spared and eventually adopted by the Falcon tribe, where he became a skilled cattle breeder. This incident shows something crucial. Ontai didn't kill for pleasure or because he liked violence. He killed because his code demanded it, but when his code allowed mercy, he offered it without hesitation. It was this combination of brutal combat effectiveness and rigorous personal code of honor that would eventually attract the attention of the vampire lust. But at that moment, Ontai was simply an exceptional teenage warrior in a tribe of exceptional warriors. At the age of 14, during his ritual of passage to adulthood, Ontai revealed his prophetic dream. He saw himself wandering the world like a dead warrior. No member of the tribe, not even the shaman, understood what this meant. They would learn soon. To understand how extraordinary the Olmakau system and warriors like Ontai were, we need to compare them with other elite military systems of the 11th century. At the same time that Ontai was killing his first hyena, European knights began their military training around the age of 7 as pages, but they did not enter into real combat until they were 21 years old, when they were formally armed knights. 14 years of training before the first real combat. Japanese samurai followed a similar path. Boys began martial training at the age of 5 or 6, but they did not see real combat until they were formally adults, typically at 15 or 16. 10 years of training before the real war. The janisars of the Ottoman Empire, considered the most disciplined military elite in the Islamic world, were recruited between the ages of 8 and 18 and went through 5 to 7 years of intensive training before entering combat. Maasai warriors like Ontai killed their first human at the age of 9. This put them in a completely different category. They weren't just well-trained. They were veterans of real combat before they became teenagers. Modern studies of military psychology show that soldiers who see combat at a very young age develop different neurological patterns from adult combatants. They process combat stress more efficiently. They have a lower incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder, but they also have greater difficulty reintegrating into civil life. This explains why Maasai warriors were notoriously inadequate for any life except war. They had been so completely shaped by combat that they could not exist outside of it. Ontai was the perfect example of this. Even after becoming Montano, even after centuries of vampiric existence, he remains fundamentally a warrior unable to leave the battlefield. The legacy of the Olmakau system continues today. Although modern Maasai do not train children for war, they maintain traditions of extreme physical and mental testing for young people. The Maasai passage ritual still involves killing a lion alone, a test that few other peoples in the world still practice. Modern military researchers study tactics of small Maasai units. The Israeli army incorporated elements of Maasai tactical doctrine into its elite units. American Special Forces study Maasai's ability to operate 4 days with minimal resources. And vampires, creatures that exist outside of normal time, still look for warriors with Antai's training and temperament. La Sombra himself once said to another vampire, "In 5,000 years, I found only one mortal who had true honor without naivety, true strength without arrogance. He was an African boy who killed men before he was 10 years old. Mount Kilimanjaro is still standing, unchanged for the passage of 1,000 years. But the warriors he produced changed the world in ways that few historians recognize. Ontai, that boy born in a storm and forged in blood, became Montano, one of the most influential vampires in European history. But he carries Kilimanjaro with him wherever he goes. Your honor is Messiah. Your code is Maasai code. Your ability to do terrible things without hesitation when necessary comes directly from Olmakau training. Today you learn that behind every legendary vampire there is a human story, and Montano's human story is that of a people who transformed war into art, child into warrior, and suffering into strength. If you want to understand how Montano managed to survive the deadly games of European vampire politics, now you know. He was trained from birth to survive the impossible. Leave it in the comments. Which aspect of Maasai training impressed you the most? Do you think such brutal methods were justified by circumstances? Historians and experts in African cultures, we would love to hear your perspective. If historical mysteries about legendary warriors fascinate you, subscribe to the channel. We have more revelations that will change your vision of history. And don't miss our next video, where we will explore another secret that history has hidden. The truth is waiting. You just need to have the courage to look.